Good afternoon and welcome to Orkney International Science Festival 2022 in this Scotland's Year of Stories. My name is Eric Walker and it's my pleasure to be hosting this session. Our speaker today is Mark Cooper. Mark is a retired biology professor from the University of Washington in Seattle. His doctorate in biophysics is from the University of California at Berkeley. Today, he will speak on the topic of sailing Neolithic seas. Mark first saw Neolithic stone monuments when he visited Scotland in 1986, while he was working as a space and gravitational biology postdoctoral associate with NASA. His current research into prehistory boats stems from his interests in the dynamics of organisms and vehicles as they move and navigate within fluids, as well as gravitational fields. Mark came to Orkney during the summer of 2018, shortly after witnessing the rapidly flowing tidal race at Neop Head on the Isle of Westray. He had a close encounter with a 4-foot carved Neolithic stone located in the Westray Heritage Centre in Pirrawall. A set of carved spirals on the Westray stone began sending a Neolithic message to him. The message he received was fluid dynamics. Those words set him on a new research path. To better understand the meanings of prehistory watery artistic motifs, he calls them hydroglyphics. Today, we'll hear about 20,000 years of prehistory nautical artworks, including how a dramatic set of hydroglyphics found at the Ness of Brodgar may provide clues to the type of Neolithic boats that could have shuttled people, cattle, timber, and other cargoes to and from the Ness. We'll also hear about how prehistory boats are apparently represented in the art, the architecture, as well as shared cosmologies of northern Neolithic seafaring cultures. Now, we have a wee technical issue with the YouTube, where the voice may become out of sync with the presentation. We apologise for this in advance if it does happen and hope it doesn't detract from your enjoyment. And I want to encourage you all to take part in the event. And I would ask you to please enter your comments and questions in the YouTube chat or use our new system for collecting questions and comments called Slido. Simply point your smartphone or tablet camera at the QR code that you can see on the screen just now, and it will take you to the question and answer area. Or visit www.slido.com and enter the code 3435541. Then you can easily enter your questions and comments, and I'll present them to Mark after the talk. So, after that introduction, Mark, it's over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me speak to you today. I'd like to provide this presentation through an MP4 video, which you will now see, and I'll be back to answer questions at the end of this. Sailing Neolithic Seas, Rhymes and Riddles of the Ancient Mariners. Today we will discuss Neolithic nautical engineering and the ancient physics of seafaring, drawing on two sources of information. A, prehistory nautical imagery, illustrations of seafaring, as portrayed in the art and architecture of ancient maritime cultures. And B, hydroglyphics, decoding ancient depictions of hydrodynamic phenomena. We will discuss evidence for three intersecting concepts. The first, boat-shaped tombs, known as naviform tombs. Second, naviform motifs, depictions of boats and their parts, as well as their boat wakes. And third, quote, hydroglyphics, a term to reflect the pictorial depiction of hydrodynamic phenomena such as whirlpools, upwellings, and the wake patterns of moving boats. Why study ancient hydroglyphics? The answer is clues. Clues to understand the thought patterns of ancient mariners, particularly in times of change, such as the 3rd millennium BCE, 3000 to 2000 BCE. During this time, there was a rise and spread of shared solar cosmologies, and these illustrate long-range impacts of trade networks and perhaps travel as well. Recently, the British Museum assembled an exhibit called The World of Stonehenge. Concepts of the cosmos and the world of Stonehenge were discussed. Through this talk, we will examine some of the artifacts that were exhibited in the world of Stonehenge. These include 2 Neolithic chalk drums, which were placed in the graves of children. These chalk drums have possible naviform and solar motifs carved into them. One of these motifs, a set of nested lozenges, appears hundreds of years later in a gold medallion which was buried with a high-ranking individual near Stonehenge. It is believed that this gold medallion represents the sun. During the next 20 minutes, I will discuss the iconography of water and boats in 15 archaeological sites which lie along the Atlantic facade, covering a period from the late Pleistocene through the Bronze Age. In these discussions, I will utilize red asterisks to illustrate hypotheses, to clearly distinguish them from established archaeological facts. Let us begin with a discussion of ancient nautical engineering, as seen in the ancient iconography of boats and prehistory seas. Before discussing naviform tombs, it is very useful to understand the construction of umiaks, which are an ancient form of skin-on-frame boats. Umiaks have a key structural feature known as a keelson, a long longitudinal axial spar which provides the umiak with major longitudinal stability, allowing it to withstand large wave actions in open seas. Here is an example of a naviform motif which exhibits evidence of a keelson. This naviform motif was carved during the 3rd millennium in a tomb located in France at the Gulf of Morbihan. This is during the time period of the construction of Stonehenge. In addition to the keelson, the motif illustrates the ribs of a boat, as well as a possible notch for a sculling oar. Overall, this naviform motif illustrates an advancing form of naval architecture taking place in the 3rd millennium, involving a more ancient form of an axial keelson. Umiaks with their axial keelson construction are capable of carrying multi-ton loads and crews and passengers between 20 and 30 people. In Greenland, horned umiaks were used to hunt sea mammals, including large whales. The horns are extensions of the gunnels. These protrusions of the gunnels allow lifting of the umiak to land it or to launch it. Platforms in fore and aft for steering and harpooning, as well as sites for attachments of cordage, such as lines attached to prey. In the upper part of the image, one sees a chain of umiaks towing a dead whale to shore. Umiaks are thought to have been crucial for the peopling of the Arctic. In addition, it is now thought that skin boats were likely used to people the Americas during the last glaciation. That time period has now been moved back to between 20 and 40,000 years ago, based on recent discovery of footprints and mammoth kills in the state of New Mexico. This plot shows a distribution of skin boats in prehistoric and historical times. The peopling of Greenland was comparatively a recent event. In general, skin and bark boats have helped Homo sapiens move around the world during the last 80,000 years. This concept provides some of the backstory to understand the peopling of Northern Europe during the Mesolithic and later the Neolithic time periods. However, it is necessary to look to the iconography of the Neolithic and Bronze Ages to obtain more detailed understanding of the type of boats that were used by these maritime peoples. Important clues to the shape of these boats can be obtained by examining stones and other artifacts that were displayed in the recent World of Stonehenge exhibition at the British Museum. On the upper left is a set of stones from the Ness of Brodgar, including an engraved stone which was excavated from the base of a structure known as the cathedral. On this stone is a set of waviform motifs, which are wave-like in character. They resemble the Kelvin wake of a traveling elongated boat. We will discuss these particular motifs in detail shortly. On the right is the Nebra sky disk, also displayed at the World of Stonehenge exhibition from 1600 BCE. Besides the solar and lunar motifs, in the lower portion of the disk is an arc. It has been postulated to be either an inverted rainbow or a celestial coracle. Coracles are an important type of boat to discuss, especially with respect to funerary practices. Several examples of coracles being used as coffins have been reported in the archaeological literature. The shape of one of these funerary coracles is closely matched to historical examples of coracles throughout Britain. These same coracles can be compared to heel-shaped cairns in northern Scotland, Caithness, as well as in the Shetland Islands. And again, there is a strong morphological correspondence between these watercraft and these funerary monuments. I encourage viewers of this presentation to visit the Boyne Curragh Heritage Group in Ireland, a world center for the reconstruction of Neolithic watercraft, curraghs and coracles. The analysis of naviform and waviform motifs in Neolithic monuments is an active and exciting area of archaeological research. This recent review by Serge Kaysen and colleagues highlights the following points. A. Naviform tombs are present in Neolithic Brittany, Bronze Age Balearic Islands, as well as Iron Age Scandinavia. B. Naviform motifs were used in the 5th millennium in Brittany. C. Astronomical and naviform motifs were sometimes juxtaposed in Neolithic monuments. I encourage viewers of this presentation to consult these references for a broader set of information about Neolithic art and architecture, Neolithic cosmologies, as well as prehistory naval architecture and journeys. We will now examine the form and function of Neolithic watercraft, drawing on the morphological features of Neolithic naviform tombs and Neolithic naviform motifs. On the right is a Neolithic megalith known as the St. Sampson Stela in northern Brittany, 70 tons, 10 meters in height. On it are a set of motifs depicting boats, sailing ships. Frequently, the masts appear to have a curving mast head. In later centuries, Egyptian cargo ships also utilized such a curving masthead. The purpose of it is to suspend a mobile sail, allowing it to pivot easily with changing wind directions. A curving masthead may have also facilitated safety of an observer sitting on the yard or yard arm in complex seas, dirty weather, navigating through complex coastlines, the precursor to the later crow's nest. Turning now to the long-horned cairns of northern Scotland, Caithness and Orkney. On the left is the long grey cairn of Campster, which has 4 protruding horns. From an aerial view, this closely matches the aspect ratios and morphological features of horned umiaks, which are found in Greenland as well as Alaska. Are there other morphological features that correspond between these cairns and boats? Are they actually naviform? One of these cairns is located in the Isle of Westray, the northwestern part of the Orkney archipelago, the Point of Cut Neolithic horned cairn of Westray. This is a quote from the final report on the excavation of the Point of Cut horned cairn. The external sidewalls curved inwards as they rose, giving the finished core cairn something of the appearance of an unturned boat. An artist's rendering of the excavated stones of the Point of Cut horned cairn shows an axial element which closely resembles that of the axial keelson on a horned umiak. Assuming that the horned cairns of Orkney and Caithness are naviform in shape, what funerary significance does a boat have for these people? Numerous cultures have conceived that boats delivered deceased souls to the afterlife, either to the underworld or to the heavens. The journey to the afterlife and boats for the dead were represented in Greek and Roman cultures. Charon served as the ferryman to the afterlife. Are umiaks and coracles for the dead being represented in the naviform funerary monuments that are prevalent in northern Scotland, Orkney, and Shetland? Elsewhere in Britain, naviform tombs are present. In southern England, in the first half of the 4th millennium, the Hazelton North Cairn, as well as the Ascot under Wychwood Long Barrow, show a prominent keelson motif, as well as what appear to be lateral ribs, again suggesting that these are naviform tombs, and in the case of the Hazelton North Cairn, the world's oldest family tree has been reconstructed from 5 generations of bones that were deposited in these passage tombs. A letter from Doggerland, mapping a vanished landscape. What evidence is there of horned umiaks along the Atlantic facade in prehistory times? It's important to emphasize that the hydrology of prehistory Europe has radically changed and continues to change. These are impacts of climate change. Recently has been published that a Mesolithic horned umiak carving is present on a stone face in northern Norway. This is now thought to be one of the earliest carvings of an umiak anywhere in the world, 10,000 years before current time. And yet, this motif is superseded by motifs that are found in the late Pleistocene caves of the Cantabria Mountains in northern Spain. These are Pleistocene naviform paintings in caves such as the Altamira cave, as well as a cave known as El Castillo. These span time scales of about 20,000 to 13,000 years before present. So nautical science involves invention, innovation, and inheritance. And the importance of archiving nautical information is to transmit it to subsequent generations. Transmitting nautical concepts involves collecting, condensing, and communicating specific types of information. This would include how to make waterproof lashings from spruce roots by splitting the roots and boiling them and using them to wrap gunnels and to stitch pieces of bark together. This is the type of nautical information that I am receiving from viewing these motifs. Before returning to a discussion of Neolithic naval architecture, I would like to comment briefly on the artistic representations of boats, using a gallery of motifs, concentrating on morphological features such as the curvature of the hull, which is known as the rocker. Ra moves through the heavens on a silver bark, represented here with a boat of high rocker. At night, he changed boats to a night boat, also in this painting with high rocker. Moving on a river, represented here with hieroglyphics. Below this is an Ice Age painting, presumably of an Ice Age boat, this is a hypothesis, floating on water, represented here as a line of dots. Is it possible to represent a concept using both realism and abstraction in the same painting? Yes. In the foreground, realism, in the background, abstraction. Let us now compare the hybridized boat motif from the Pleistocene with a boat motif from the Neolithic on the St. Sampson stela, which we discussed before. Note that the boat motif with high rocker has similar morphological features to a gondola in modern Venice. Consider again the issues of realism versus abstraction. Naviform motifs. Stitched bark and stitched skin boats of prehistory Europe. Both of these types of boats allowed the northward migrations of peoples during the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic times. These issues are outlined in this compendium, The Bark Canoes and Skin Boats of Northern Eurasia, which describes the diversification of these watercraft during prehistory and historical times. I would also like to recommend this following recent review. Neolithic Seafaring and Maritime Technologies Shaped a New World of Megalithic Societies. Seas as a part of a shared cosmology. We have discussed naviform tombs, naviform motifs. In the final portion of this presentation, we will discuss 3 examples of Neolithic hieroglyphics. The first story involves the Ness of Brodgar, the most incredible piece of Neolithic decoration found on the site. This refers to a carved stone decorated with numerous V-shaped waviform motifs. These motifs closely resemble the V-shaped wakes that follow traveling boats. This carved stone was deposited at the southwest buttress of Structure 10 at the Ness of Brodgar. This structure is also known as the Cathedral. How can this stone be analyzed? Do these triangular patterns represent the depictions of Kelvin wakes, which is the term used to describe boat wakes, named after the Scottish physicist Lord Kelvin, who first described the linear physics that gives rise to these wakes behind traveling boats. However, Kelvin wakes also have nonlinear elements, which require computers and computational methods to solve. There is a reference to these calculations in the lower right. If you analyze geometrically the angles of these motifs, They closely correspond to the Kelvin wake angle, which is approximately 39 degrees. These patterns fit the concept of Kelvin wakes from geometric, physical, fluid mechanics standpoints, but do they correspond to Kelvin wakes when viewed from an artistic or archaeological perspective? Knowing your boat means knowing its wake. Wake patterns depend on boat shape, boat speed, and depth of water. These factors would have been known to ancient mariners. Perhaps they collated this information and had it archived on this special stone. If you are a wakeboarder or a water skier, you will recognize the wake pattern of a fast-moving boat over on the right. What type of boats could have made fast-moving wakes in the Neolithic? Outriggers. On the opposite side of the seafaring stone is this tripartite motif, which I interpret to be a possible outrigger, a sailing outrigger. Above that is a triac, a modern modified kayak with outriggers, which are a very speedy type of sailboat. In the Neolithic, a dugout canoe could be fitted with outriggers, and adding a sail. This was done by a man in Australia, and this YouTube illustrates its seaworthiness. To make even faster boat, young ancient mariners who were studying nautical engineering at the Academy of Brodgar in the Ness could have asked their instructors to import high-quality bark from Britain to manufacture bark canoes. Take these boats, add outriggers, sail, grease the hull with pig grease or cow grease, then take the boat to Loch Stennis and sail it in a 40-mile-an-hour westerly wind. What type of speeds would be expected? Perhaps as high as 10 knots. At this speed, the bark canoe with its outrigger likely to make wake patterns that resemble those displayed on the seafaring stone. Moving to the second topic of hieroglyphics, celestial symbols and boat motifs. Moon motifs have been found on carved stones in Orkney, Brittany, and Ireland. These similar moon motifs are sometimes juxtaposed or placed within neighbor-form motifs, such as B from the Gulf of Morbihan, the Pierre des Plats dolmen, which we've discussed before. In this neighbor-form motif, you see motifs for the full moon as well as the crescent moon. Does this represent the concept of a celestial boat moving the moon through the night sky? In the 3rd millennium in Sumeria, Sumerians had a god, Nana, which was believed to move through the night sky in a lunar boat. Let's take that concept to Northern Ireland and look at the rear stone, the highly decorated rear stone of the Carrowkeel Cairn T. This passage tomb receives illumination at the equinoxes. Light passes through a light box and illuminates these motifs, which include numerous celestial motifs, a waviform motif in the upper portion of the stone, and several naviform motifs. Comparing these motifs, these naviform motifs, to one that we discussed earlier from the Gulf of Morbihan, one sees a similar keelson motif as well as rib motifs. Are these evidence of a shared cosmological belief that boats are vehicles for celestial objects in the night sky? Now moving to the final topic of Neolithic hieroglyphics, the Newgrange Passage Tomb entrance stone, which is considered to be one of the finest examples of Neolithic art, is a story being told in this stone, a story of vortices and upwellings, essentially a story of a whirlpool complex. Let us briefly compare these motifs to the dynamics of a whirlpool complex. Once again, vortices, overflows, upwellings. Note that the upwellings are an area of clear water where the water is rising up and spreading laterally. There's evidence of that in these nested chevrons. Is this a dynamical map of the Corryvreckan whirlpool complex? Corryvreckan is a strait between two islands in the Inner Hebrides, which we will discuss in a moment. The Gulf of the Corryvreckan has very extreme hydrodynamics. Strong tidal flows, whirlpools, upwellings, overflows, and standing waves, many of them which could conceivably correspond to these dynamics. We will also draw on the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci, who studied whirlpool complexes in his laboratory, and the concept of vortex splitting, which is illustrated in this diagram. In the next two slides, I will briefly discuss a hypothesis that the Newgrange entrance stone represents a hydrographic tablet illustrating two phases of a tidal cycle in the Gulf of the Corryvreckan. On the left portion of the stone would be the vortices generated during the flood tide, where water is flowing out into the Atlantic. On the right side of the stone would represent the ebb tide dynamics, taking place when water is flowing from the Atlantic into the Irish Sea. As tidal flows flow past Scarborough, they interact with an underwater rock pinnacle, which is the source of these vortices. If one looks at the entrance stone, one sees a change in chirality. The vortices on the left portion of the stone are turning in the clockwise direction, whereas on the right, they're turning in the counterclockwise direction. These dynamics are clearly demarcated by a linear line, suggesting a change in space and time. One can see these dynamics with drones flying over the Corryvreckan. Below is the ebb tide dynamics. Such dynamics were first characterized by Leonardo da Vinci with water flowing by an obstacle. Here is a cross-sectional view, not to scale, but showing the dynamics of water on the ebb flow interacting with the pinnacle. I've added Da Vinci's diagrams of a vortex stream coming to the surface and producing the ebb vortices, which are seen in the drone images. Besides vortices, there are numerous upwellings, which may correspond to the chevrons, the spreading chevrons or lozenges in the Newgrange entrance stone. This is another view of the vortices and upwellings in the ebb tide, which is moving towards the Irish Sea. These dynamics would be especially prominent with low-angle light illumination, which would occur during the sunrise, the dawn of the winter solstice. Light rays passing over Jura would intersect a rocky ridge on the Isle of Scarborough, producing a distinctive shadow beyond it. Observers in the shadow would still be able to view the whirlpool dynamics, and the forward scatter from these illuminating light rays would create a very dramatic illumination of the whirlpool complex. Neolithic pilgrims and artists may have positioned themselves at this vista point to view both the ebb tide dynamics as well as the flood tide dynamics. This brings up a question whether the Newgrange passage tomb was specifically designed to replicate the winter solstice illumination of the Corryvreckan as well as the Isle of Scarborough. In concluding, we have examined the following key concepts and implications. Nautical engineering. We've discussed the age of keelson from before 20,000 BCE to the present. Using this concept, it is possible to analyze prehistory neighbor-form art and architecture examining these monuments and motifs for evidence of a keelson or other structural parts of a boat. This helps place the monument or motif within a certain archaeological context, such as a funerary boat, or a technical diagram which is being used for educational purposes. A similar approach can be used to analyze Neolithic hieroglyphics, which are hydrodynamic symbolics. A set of hydrodynamic symbolics seems to have been used by these maritime cultures to tell stories. We've discussed, for instance, the Newgrange entrance tomb, whether it expresses the story of the Corryvreckan whirlpool complex at different phases of its tidal cycle. Another example is the concept of a boat with its trailing wake, which may be expressed in the Fulton drum, shown in the center of this montage. This combination of a boat plus its trailing wake may correspond to the motif seen here in this Bronze Age razor, which appears to have a elongated tapered boat motif followed by a flaring wake. The depiction of celestial objects such as the sun, or maritime objects such as waves, boats, and their wakes, may have been conserved for hundreds of years among maritime cultures. How do regional similarities among neighbor-form tombs or neighbor-form motifs, as well as regional similarities in hieroglyphics, alter our views of what was occurring in the Neolithic among maritime cultures? Do these tombs reflect the regional use of certain types of boats, horned umiaks, coracles, currachs? Did regional expressions of hieroglyphics serve as a means of establishing and reinforcing regional identities? Kelvin wakes at the Ness, quadrupolar vortices on the Isle of Westray, tripolar vortices at Newgrange. Perhaps all of these hieroglyphics are sacred symbols of the sea, reflecting a variation on a theme, an integrated cosmology that interlinks the earth, the seas, and the sky. May the Kelvin wake be with you. Archaeologists recognize Brittany as the launch point for the Neolithic colonization of Britain, Ireland, Orkney, and Shetland. What role did boats, wakes, and hieroglyphics play in this maritime culture? One can visit the Table des Martins dolmen in the Gulf of Morbihan and view the rear stone of this passage tomb. It is covered with elaborate hieroglyphics which closely resemble the Kelvin wake. What better way to evaluate this comparison than to compare the 6,000-year-old carving to an aerial drone shot of a Kelvin wake being formed? What type of interactions did ancient mariners have with this particular stone, with this display of a putative Kelvin wake? Did they offer prayers to receive some expected outcome? For instance, were they seeking a smooth sailing? Perhaps it is possible to translate that concept into the following idiom. May the sea forces be with you.
Absolutely superb, and I don't know why I've lost my background, but I appear to have lost my background. So I'll try and do that. There we go. It's easy. Mark, thank you very much for that. That was absolutely. I got really engrossed, really engrossed in it. I love the way I think it was the Newgrange stone. That's brilliant. The whirlpool complexes through the ebb and flow. I can see exactly. I can picture that that is what it symbolizes, you know.
And you told me you flew over the Corrie Vrecken many times, right? When you were working.
I used to work on Isla. I used to work in distilleries in Isla, and you know, the quick way of getting off and on the island was flying in a low altitude single engine plane, and it was wonderful. So yeah, you can see these things, you know. Actually, those drone shots, I presume, are from other people, Mark.
Oh yes.
If you had access to drones and you could come up with a project, right, where would you go? What would you be looking for, you know, to prove, because these are theories, so you would want to be proving these, wouldn't you?
That's a great idea. You know, the next winter solstice coming up on December 21st, I would go to Jura, like this fellow who posted the nautical drone YouTube of the Corrie Vrecken. So you could launch from the northern part of Jura and position the drone at that vista point that I pointed out in my talk, and get that drone there right before the sunrise on the solstice, and see if the forward scatter from the whirlpool complex is a dramatic event. That's where I would take a drone. The other place would be Newpep, which is right behind you on your green screen.
Right.
That's the Skerries right off of that northwestern tip of Isle of Westray. That's where I suspect there might be colliding tidal jets. And that's the type of hydrodynamics you need to get a quadrupolar vortex. And that's what I saw on the Westray stone. So if you're a drone operator, I would encourage you to think Newped and Corrie Vrecken.
Yeah, I should put them in touch with you, Mark. That's what I should be doing. Yeah, I'm talking about the Westray stone. It sounds like you've had a real eureka moment there. And, you know, when the message fluid dynamics came to your head, did you actually shout out? You didn't run naked through the street like Archimedes did with his thing.
I just stood there for about 10 minutes taking in the stone, and it's as, I believe, as sophisticated as Leonardo da Vinci's diagrams.
Yeah, there's a few questions have come in through Slido. It's one of them was, have you yourself had the opportunity to build a modern day umiak or sailing one? Oh,
great question. I bought one on eBay. Okay, so if you go to the cairn of Get, which is near Wick and Caithness, you'll see the Neolithic, what is called a short horned cairn, and it's not an umiak. So I began wondering what type of boat would a person working the sea cliffs along that part of Scotland use if you were, say, getting shellfish from mussels from the sides. So I figured out you take a coracle, and if you're a young person, you can just start with a cup and add some ballast, some stone or some cobblestones, and that'll be your starting point. But you add ribs or horns. Now when you collide to the cliff walls, you'll bounce off. So I've been reconstructing some watercraft, mostly scaled down versions. I haven't been doing a Thor Heyerdahl experiment yet of a full scale thing.
Yeah. The depictions on the stones, do you think they are? Do you think they were simply like they just recorded what they saw? Do you think it was artistic, or do you think it actually served? It was a purpose. It was like a sailing, a navigation aid, or something. You know.
Oh, there's examples of all of the above. You know, anytime we make an artistic expression, it's abstracting our perceptions. And we're often making these diagrams to convey them to someone else. So I think when you look at, say, these, what seem to be Kelvin wakes on the carved stone from the Ness of Bredgar, they may have been an educational motif to talk to young people about sailing speeds. Because if you talk to mariners who sail small boats, they're often looking at their wake to judge their speed. And so when you're on the waves, you're very plugged in. You have to feel all of the forces, the accelerations, and trying to navigate knowing how fast you're going. looking at your boat wake is one way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's maybe thing, if you're going to sail across here, you better create a wake like this, otherwise you're in trouble. It could be a simple, it could be a, a giveaway sign, whatever it is, yeah. Have you ever, I was going to say, your research, right, because you've obviously had this, as I say, eureka moment, you've come up with all these possibilities. Have you tested any, have you got any assistance? Have you tested any of your ideas or math on anybody? Just to try and verify it or validate it?
Well, my wife is a physics professor, so I showed her the motifs on the Westray stone, and I said, this quadrupolar vortex, I think that's fluid dynamics, and she said, you can't get that. And I said, wait a minute, what if you had two tidal jets colliding? She goes, oh, of course, that works. So the question is, where would you get that on Westray? And so that's where I began looking with Google Earth. And if you zoom down, what's amazing with Google Earth is you can see the wave patterns in bouncing off of headlands and begin to analyze where's most likely that a Neolithic artist would have positioned themselves. So again, I draw people's attention to those cliffs at the northwest part of Newpad. And if you took a drone there, I think if people would post YouTubes of those hydrodynamics, it would be amazing if a quadrupolar vortex is discovered there.
Mm-hmm. You showed like some of the Egyptian gods and deities of other nations where it was a boat you sailed in to get to this place of importance or whatever. And the Norsemen or the Vikings, very important Norsemen and Vikings, they were buried in a boat to take them to their afterlife or whatever. I was wondering as I was watching that there, if the burial in these, the burial cairns that are shaped like boats or rumiaks, if that's a symbolic way of doing that, Mark,
Yes, that tradition may have started in Brittany in around 4300 BCE, and this may have spread to Britain, Ireland, Orkney, and Shetland. And that tradition of building a naviform tomb, certainly in Britain, it seems to be quite common. Mm. I think if people would look at these cairns and long barrows through that lens, that hypothetical lens, and say, could you construct a boat based on that diagram? And I think those funerary monuments give us the templates from which we can start examining that hypothesis.
And do you think the ancients could have possibly done that? I mean, I know they don't have the, they didn't again have the maths and physics knowledge that we had, but there were people that could look at things and make things and do things, weren't they? They were much more in tune with the feel of things, I suppose.
In Caithness and Orkney, there's 8 long-horned cairns, and they're variations on a theme. They're clearly using a template with, I'm sure that they had very well-established weights and measures. Dr. Ann Tether has analyzed some Neolithic chalk drums that she believes were used as tape measures in the Neolithic. And so I encourage people to look at her work, and you can see once you have a unit of measure, that's the type of thing you would use for surveying and laying out these grand motifs. Or these cairns are like 60 to 80 meters in length. Enormous amounts of stone were being moved, either by people or oxen, clearing the land. So one has to imagine that they really valued these monuments and placed some of their dead in those monuments.
Mm. You mentioned 2 years ago, was it, you did the talk on the stone keels, the big stone keels. Or do any of them have any markings like that on them, Mark?
I would say in the long grey cairn of Campster, there is a stone adjacent to the rear stone that looks to me like a stone skeg stone. A skeg is a miniaturized part of a ship's keel. The reason for it is sort of like a dart. Okay, so what I did is I took a dart and I cut it. So now you have a fin. And if you made that out of stone, now you could put that in your boat. It would weight the boat down, but it means you could put cargo here. So the importance of this, there is a carved stone in the passage of this long great cairn of Camster. It might be a Neolithic skeg stone. No question, why would they put that in there? Well, you have a neighbor-formed tomb, and if you had a valued stone that was used in a Neolithic boat, maybe you would place that stone in there to help the dead person make it to the afterlife.
Yeah. We're creating a story here, Mark. We're creating a story. Somebody asked, like, the building materials in these boats, you know, obviously they were natural. They would have been natural at the time, you know, not oil-based like our ones. But so by definition, they're very biodegradable. It must make research very difficult, you know, to try and find any remnants that you can do any analysis or with at all.
Now, in the archaeological record, there's about 3 coracles, funerary coracles that have been found on the east coast of Britain. One of them was just the impression of the coracle. The other 2, there were bits of leather and basketry. So we do have to look towards the art and architecture to view that as the primary archaeological evidence that we can begin to use, you know, to construct hypotheses about what these boats may have looked like. It requires a fusion of dialogue between nautical engineers, archaeologists, and artists to sort this out.
You know, there's a lot of work being done here at the nests and things like that. Is any of the research being done there that, you know, could relate to what, you know, your hypothesis? Is there anybody else trying?
Oh yes, there's a group in France, Serge Casson and his colleagues, who work at the Gulf of Morbihan, and they are analyzing these neighbor-form motifs that you find inside the passage tombs. And they published some very insightful papers about the type of nautical engineering that was used to create these motifs. Bettina Schultz-Paulsen at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden is also a world leader in looking at these types of constructions. There are carvings of umiak-like boats in Scandinavia from the Stone Age, or sorry, the Neolithic and the Bronze Ages, also bark canoes. But I think if you visit Don's maps, and that's listed in my talk, if you go to the cave paintings of northern Spain, Cantabria Mountains, El Castillo, the cave of Altamira, and another cave, La Pasiega, all of them have these neighbor-form paintings. And I think it's going to require some detailed analysis to see if those correspond to, say, stitched bark boats, stitched skin boats.
Yeah. Mark, we've done the usual. We've chatted and we've come to our allotted time. I could chat with you for ages on this subject, but
thank you again, Eric, for hosting.
Seriously, thanks very much. I thoroughly enjoy talking with you and hosting your presentations. It's fascinating stuff. But seriously, thanks once again for doing that. Now, I'd like to thank the audience as well for contributing. Slido was extremely busy there, so quite a few of the questions came from the audience, Mark. So you did a great job in getting them on board, so to speak. So just thank you very much for that first fascinating talk. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of festival housekeeping here. There are several films available for you online via YouTube over the next couple of hours. Drawing Archaeology, The Deer Woman, and When the Grass Dances. Also starting online at 8 p.m, Ian Archibald tells the story of Mary Somerville, the Queen of Science. definitely worth making time for. So check your programme, click on the links to view them. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, can I just say thanks to Mark and also to the tech team who work in the shadows and make all these events possible. So for now, until the next time, goodbye.